Chapter 6, 1968. Zina is ordained. By January, Zina had arrived in Ceylon and rented a house close to the one she and Conrad had shared in the jungle near Kandy. Her mother, Harriet, and friends, including Nicholas and Bhagwan Das, joined her there. Meanwhile, Lama Yeshe and Sopa Rinpoche returned to Buxa Dwar in time for Losar and began arranging their travel papers in order to meet Zina in Ceylon. In a clear, neat hand, Sopa Rinpoche wrote to Nicholas Deutsch, enclosing some photos from Darjeeling. We thought that you would like these photos that were did at Darjeeling and are sending you. The new British boy, stands the left side, is also a firm Buddhist. He had understood many things of Buddha within the 2 months at Darjeeling, during the time of his staying with us. He is so young boy, very clear-headed boy and fortunate. He learned also Tibetan letter. How we happy at Darjeeling at the time of living you with us. Please write us. Eternal love and bless from Sopa, Thubten Yeshe. I am sorry my bad handwriting. While Zina was in Ceylon, Thubten Yeshe and Sopa Rinpoche went to Varanasi to receive teachings from Khebje Chujang Rinpoche. While there, they were able to connect again with monks from all over India. Not only had Thubten Yeshe deliberately avoided taking up an appointment in Sarnath, he also appeared to have turned his back on completing the precious Geshe degree. When he left Buxa for the last time, he gave his big English grammar book as a parting gift to his loyal tea-maker, Pasang Tsering. I told him maybe I can't understand English, said Pasang Tsering, but I put the book in my trunk because he gave it to me. When I opened the trunk many years later, the book had turned into powder. Insects ate it. After a few months in Ceylon, Zina decided she wanted to be a nun. So she left her mother and daughter in Ceylon and snuck back into India, where she was still blacklisted. It was common enough to be blacklisted, said Clive. I was too, but I had a British passport, and it would have meant a big incident to throw me out. Zina's big problem was her American passport, but somehow she got through. In Delhi, she contacted Jean Smith, who took her to see a friend, who was the Secretary of Education at that time, to see what they could work out for her. Harriet and Rhea flew to Delhi to meet her, and the authorities began watching them round the clock. One time Harriet stopped her car, said Clive. She got out and walked back to the Secret Service guys, or whatever they were, in the official ambassador car behind them and said, Listen, we're spending all this money on taxis, so why don't you just drive us around? We're only here for a week. And they did. Lama Yeshe says, Zina had decided to become a nun. I thought that was a good idea. But since, according to the Vinaya, novice ordination requires the participation of at least 4 monks in addition to the preceptor, Lama Zopa and I couldn't do it ourselves. We went to Dharamsala to ask His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who arranged for some other lamas to ordain her. Thubten Yeshe and Sopa Rinpoche returned to Darjeeling, and then went to Calcutta to meet up with Zina. This trip must have given them their first sight of the ocean. The trio then traveled to Dharamsala, where they went to see His Holiness the Dalai Lama and make offerings. This was only the second time Sopa Rinpoche had seen His Holiness. The first had been outside the Dalhousie school when he had come to meet Freda Bedi. During this audience, Zina took off all her jewelry and offered it to the Dalai Lama. Afterwards, her thick blonde hair was shaved off, and on July 31st, Khebje Chujang Rinpoche ordained her at his home, Nauraji Koti, and gave her the name Thubten Changchup Pamo. The first Westerner ordained in the Tibetan tradition was an American, Robert A. F. Thurman, in 1962. He disrobed upon returning to the United States. Thurman later became the Je Tsongkhapa Professor of Indo-Tibetan Buddhist Studies at Columbia University and a co-founder of Tibet House, USA. He wrote many groundbreaking works on Tibetan Buddhism, including Why the Dalai Lama Matters in 2008. In 1997, he was named one of Time magazine's 25 most influential Americans. Although the date of her ordination is uncertain, the second ordained Westerner was the Scottish debutante, Miss Robinson, who came to be known as Sister Vajra. Ordained in the Kagyu tradition, Sister Vajra was killed when her Darjeeling cottage collapsed on top of her during a landslide. Her body was found under the rubble, an umbrella in one hand, a briefcase containing the money she had gathered to sponsor Tibetans in the other. Unbeknownst to Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Sister Vajra had been one of his benefactors for a time when he was younger. Sometime around 1963, the American Jane Werner was ordained in the Sakya tradition. In 1964, a young Englishwoman, Diane Perry, was ordained as Tenzin Palmo, also in the Kagyu tradition. She spent 12 years meditating in a cave in Lahul, India, before dedicating her life to founding nunneries and helping nuns study the Dharma. Tenzin Palmo received worldwide attention as an author and lecturer. Vicki McKenzie told her story in Cave in the Snow. In 1966, when she was 55 years old, Frida Bedi was ordained by the 16th Karmapa, the head of the Kagyu lineage, and received the name Karma Tsujim Kacho Palmo. Zina appears to have been the first Western woman ordained in the Gelug tradition. 2 weeks later, on August 14th, traveling papers issued by the Indian government arrived for Thupten Yeshi and Soba Rinpoche. The papers stated that Sergei Thupten Zipa Tuku RC number 284, Buxa, and Sergei Thupten Yeshe RC number 869, Buxa, are invited to Ceylon for 1 year by Mrs. C. Rooks, St. George, Kandy, who will meet the cost of their journey and also their maintenance in Ceylon. Yet after all that, they did not go. Lama Yeshe says, "For some reason I felt uneasy about going to Ceylon, so I suggested to Zina we go to Nepal instead. It was close to Tibet, beautiful, peaceful, and quiet. Environment is very important, and I thought that since Zina was now a nun, she needed to be where she could lead a simple life. Taking ordination alone is not enough. After leaving life in the big samsara, you need time to adjust to life as a monk or nun, and your surroundings are very important in this." There were additional reasons why they did not go. Ceylon and Tibet adhere to different traditions of Buddhist practice, Hinayana and Mahayana respectively. Although these schools derive from a common source, they evolved along different lines. Endeavoring to establish a Mahayana monastery in a Hinayana country could have resulted in difficulties. Furthermore, Ceylon's climate was hot and humid, and Soba Rinpoche's health was still quite fragile. Finally, Zina no longer controlled large sums of money and was often close to broke. But they couldn't stay in India either. Government spies still watched Zina's every move. 4 or 5 lurked constantly. Another, with a classic handlebar mustache, even sat with them in the same train carriage on their way to Dharamsala. The Indian government refused to give Zina another visa, so it was decided that they should go to Nepal, where Rinpoche had been born. They left Dharamsala and traveled to Delhi, where Zina put them up in the new Hotel Oberoi Intercontinental, and arrived in Nepal in October. A message was rapidly dispatched to Losang Nyima in Buxa to please come and bring the rest of their belongings, which consisted mostly of Tibetan pecha, loose-leaf Tibetan texts. Many of Thupten Yeshe's peers were deeply shocked that a monk of his stature would walk out of his monastery before completing his Geshe degree and run off to Nepal with an Inji female. But every move Thupten Yeshe made was personally approved by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and his 2 tutors, Kyabje Lingrim Rinpoche and Kyabje Trijang Rinpoche. Sopa Rinpoche was his constant companion, and Thupten Yeshe committed himself totally to his exceptional student. That year, the committee at Buxa decided to make early nominations for the Geshe exam entrance, and included Thupten Yeshe's name in the list, but he never returned to Buxa. When his classmates and friends received their Geshe degrees, they remembered their friend. "This was how he had chosen to use his time," said Geshe Champa Tekcho. "There is a lot of waiting around for the Geshe degree, and he was already very knowledgeable in all the subjects and had all the qualifications of a Geshe. Many monks called him by that title, despite his never officially receiving the degree." Once again Thupten Yeshi had made his own decision against the advice of others, such as his teacher Geshe Sopa, who had advised him to stay on and complete the degree. But he left anyway, taking Lama Sopa, who also had to study, and then they met this Zina, said Geshe Sopa. It was all most irregular. With his quick ear for the hippie idiom, Thupten Yeshi put it simply, I was dropout Geshe. Later, when better able to express himself in English, he said, I left Tibet with nothingness. Who helped me? My mum was not there. My bed was not there. All my comforts were not there. But Dharma wisdom explained everything to me. Really, I have no higher realizations, but personally, I am very happy the Chinese caused me to leave. I could have created an incredible attachment fantasy with my life, with titles, names, and other ridiculous things. But it's fanciful. It would have meant nothing. The Chinese pushing me out made me develop much more strength. Up to the 25th year of my life, I was incredibly taken care of in such good conditions compared to Western people. But if you actualize your understanding of the nature of Buddha Dharma for just 10 minutes every day, it is really worthwhile and keeps you laughing rather than just being restless. Return to Nepal. The story of the origin of the Kathmandu Valley and the holy stupa of Swayambhu comes from the Buddhist scriptures. Manju Deva, an emanation of Manju Shri, came to Nepal and circumambulated the valley, striding along the surrounding mountaintops. At that time, the Kathmandu Valley was an enormous lake, in the center of which was a hill covered with lotus flowers. Manjudeva took his great sword and sliced a gash in the mountains to the south. The waters of the lake drained away, leaving only a small lake behind. Thus was the Kathmandu Valley made inhabitable. The gash came to be known as Chobar Gorge. On its hilltop, through Manjudeva's magical power, a lotus was transformed into the Swayambhu Stupa, which is holy to both Hindus and Buddhists. The mystical aura associated with Kathmandu lured many young world travelers to take a bus or plane to that legendary valley. Many got as far as Kathmandu and went no further. There was also a small community of Western diplomats and aid workers living in the Kathmandu Valley, bringing an influx of foreign currency, especially American dollars. Many of the Western visitors were the sons and daughters of affluent middle-class families, and the Tibetan refugees and Nepalese merchants were happy to profit from their patronage. In 1968, Kathmandu was like the proverbial Shangri-La, untouched and innocent. Small streets, rickshaws ran rather than cars, only a few tourists, breathtaking views of the Himalayas, Hindu and Buddhist temples on every corner, occasional mountain climbing expeditions making ready to trek to higher altitudes. Crime was almost unheard of, and no one locked their doors. There was no electricity except in the area around the king's palace. In honor of the thousands of hippies who passed through, Jochintole in downtown Kathmandu came to be known as Freak Street, a small nondescript lane. It was lined with hash shops, cheap hostels, and handicraft shops. Simple little restaurants, serving pancakes, buffalo hamburgers, and other approximated Western foods, as well as Tibetan momos and Indian chai. Kathmandu was actually 3 cities, Kantipur, Patan, and Bhaktapur. Surrounded by mountains in all directions, high Himalayan peaks towered to the north. The Kathmandu Valley floor was covered with terraced fields of wheat and water-filled rice paddies, small villages and pilgrimage sites sacred to both Hindus and Buddhists. Cows, goats, water buffalo, and hungry dogs wandered the streets and fields. Strong aromas, pungent, sweet, spicy, rank, smoky, rancid, and sharp, frequently overwhelmed the senses. King Mahendra, Nepal's king in 1968, was regarded as an incarnation of the Hindu god Vishnu. His family resided in the Narayaniti Royal Palace, a huge white edifice situated at the end of a broad avenue. Durbar Marg and Avenue Durbar Marg and was surrounded by parks and gardens scattered with enormous trees filled with fruit bats. Liveried Gurkha guards stood at attention at every entrance. Bodhanath. With its snow peaks, fresh cold air, Sherpas and crowds of Tibetan refugees, Nepal was a perfect environment for Thupten Yeshi and Zina, and a long overdue homecoming for Thupten Soba Rinpoche. The monks moved into a little cottage at the back of Samten Ling, a Geluk Gompa connected with the great Kachin Yeshi Genzins, Dipse Chogling Gompa in Tibet, set just behind the main circle of buildings surrounding the Bodhanath Stupa. Located about 7 miles by crowded minibus from Kathmandu, Bodhanath was a small village, just a circle of tall Nepalese houses clustered around a massive stupa, a gigantic white dome dating from the 6th century and topped with Buddha eyes painted on all 4 sides. A powerful sacred Buddhist pilgrimage site, the Bodhanath Stupa is ringed at the base with a brick wall set with niches in which are set 108 copper prayer wheels that revolve continuously under the hands of passing pilgrims. Little shops sold Tibetan antiques and cheap odds and ends from India. Devout Buddhists performed kora around the stupa day and night, circling clockwise, clicking rosaries, and spinning the prayer wheels. The atmosphere was full of muttered mantras, half-whispered prayers for the dead and for relief from all the sufferings of sentient beings who fill unimaginable universes. On the main road at the entrance to the stupa, one could catch the diesel minibus that transported people and whatever luggage, vegetables, or livestock they had, back and forth between Bodha, as the village was known in Kathmandu. Or one could wait for a tiger taxi. All the taxis in Kathmandu were painted with tiger stripes in those days. The main road, built along an ancient trade route from Tibet, led back towards Kathmandu to the southwest and to the King's Forest to the east. Behind the stupa, a few houses were scattered among the rice paddies. Among them, in an area known as Tintuli, an old walled house with a tower, a former palace of Nepal's Rana rulers. Beyond the fields in the distance rose Mount Shivapuri. Bodha faced the Bagmati River. About halfway between Kathmandu and Bodha, and on the far bank of the Bagmati, lay Pashupatinath, Nepal's most sacred Shiva temple, and one of the most important Hindu pilgrimage sites in the world. Surrounded by tall trees and acres of woodlands, the temple was rarely empty, as a constant stream of Hindu devotees and ascetic sadhus made their ablutions and offerings. In stark contrast, just behind Pashupati lay the new Tribhuvan International Airport, where the small fleet of Royal Nepal Airlines propeller planes came and went from neighboring countries and destinations within Nepal. Serkang Dorje Chang. Following the tradition, upon arriving in Nepal, Thupten Yeshi and Soba Rinpoche paid their respects to the highest Geluk Lama in the Kathmandu Valley, Serkang Dorje Chang. Zina loved meeting high lamas, and Thupten Yeshi had prepared some questions for her to ask. Arriving at Serkang Rinpoche's Gompa at Swayambhu, they asked directions from a nondescript passing monk, who directed them upstairs and told them to wait. To their surprise, the great Serkang Dorje Chang and this seemingly insignificant monk turned out to be one and the same person. There were many tales told about Serkang Dorje Chang's ability to disappear and reappear at will, and to almost never appear in photographs taken of him. Thupten Yeshi and Soba Rinpoche knew that when you ask questions of a great yogi, he may not answer, but may respond wrathfully, or may even ask you to leave. But if it is the right time of day, for example, dusk is considered inauspicious, and if your heart is sincere and your karma good, he will talk with you. Zina piped up confidently with question about Guru devotion, a central tenet of Tibetan Vajrayana Buddhism. Serkang Dorje Chang replied with a small lesson. I couldn't comprehend any of it, Soba Rinpoche admitted later. The only thing I heard was, when the Guru is sitting on the floor in front of you, just think, this is Guru Shakyamuni Buddha. Serkang Dorje Chang had a text open beside him. In her direct Western manner, Zina asked him to read from it. He refused, saying, No, I'm completely ignorant. He often spoke like that if he felt there was no good purpose in teaching more, said Soba Rinpoche. Sergang Dorje Chung was soon to demonstrate another lesson on Guru devotion. Thubten Yeshe and Soba Rinpoche arrived at Samten Ling just in time for the Enyumnye, a 2-day fasting retreat associated with Avalokiteshvara. The Nyumnye practice lineage was particularly important at Samten Ling. The monks invited their guests to join them in the practice, which was scheduled to coincide with Labab Tuchin, one of the 4 auspicious wheel-turning days that celebrate significant events in the life of Shakyamuni Buddha. Typically, Nyumnyes are sponsored. A benefactor offers food on the first day and makes generous offerings to each monk at the end. The benefactor of this Nyumnye was a Tibetan shopkeeper from Swayambhu, who invited Trushik Rinpoche to perform the daily Mahayana ordination ceremony that takes place every morning during Nyumnyes. However, because one has to take the Lama from whom one receives the precepts as one's guru, and Trushik Rinpoche is from the Nyingma tradition, even though Rinpoche was there, the Geluk Samten Ling monks invited Sergang Dorje Chung to give the precepts, a sectarian decision. Sergang Dorje Chung entered the crowded Gompa, but did not sit on the throne as expected, but on a simple monk's cushion instead. He then opened his text and began the Mahayana motivation. The real Dharma practice, he said, is if someone has just made kaka and your guru tells you to eat it. You go there immediately and lick it up while it is still hot. There is no other motivation. Guru devotion leads to realization of the 3 principal aspects of the path leading to enlightenment. He then closed the text and, without another word, left the room. The monks sat in stunned silence, contemplating his words, and then took the 8 precepts from the altar instead of from an actual living teacher. Soba Rinpoche said later that those few words had struck him so deeply he immediately accepted Sergang Dorje Chung as a guru, including him in his visualization of the merit field. Zina meets old friends. Clive Gibois was now teaching English in Kathmandu. I was in my apartment when my cook came to tell me an old friend had come to visit. There was Zina with her head shaved, wearing robes and laughing her head off. She told me she'd just arrived and needed a place to live, so she stayed with me for about a week. Harriet had left, having placed Rhea in the care of Kusho Serga, the Tibetan representative in Nepal. Zina still stood out in a crowd, but she had changed. Where once she had ordered extravagantly and wasted much, she now chose the simplest food in restaurants. She had also grown quite stocky and solid, almost masculine in appearance, but she was still quick to rent rooms in the best house in town, the Double Dorje house belonging to Thubten, the eldest son of the 3rd Chini Lama, a Nyingma Lama and influential political figure, who held the position of steward and abbot of the Bodha Stupa and its lands. On the hippie trail, Kathmandu was certainly the jewel in the crown. In 1968, student riots had broken out in France, and there were peace marches in the United States. Everyone was looking for alternatives. Hash was still legal in Nepal, but the hippie movement was just about drugs. Once again, Zina was in the coolest place on earth, and all kinds of old friends gathered at the Double Dorje house. Rhea spent most of her time in Kathmandu, although Zina collected her regularly, dressed her up like a little doll, and brought her out to Bodha for visits, after which she was whisked away again. Soba Rinpoche meets his family. It was big news around the Solukhumbu region that Soba Rinpoche, the Laudo Lama, had returned to Nepal. His mother first learned he was still alive when he visited her sister in Darjeeling in 1967. Now he wrote from Kathmandu asking her to come and see him. My mother and me and our brother, Sangye, took 10 days to walk down to Bodhanath, said Rinpoche's sister, Ngowan Samdem. We sold salt and other things along the way. When we got to the monastery, we didn't recognize Rinpoche. We thought Thubten Yeshe must be him, but then someone introduced us. We were shocked at how skinny he was, because he had always been a fat boy. Now he was extremely skinny. We couldn't think of anything to say. We all just cried and cried. Around this time, some important Dharma teachings were being given in Bodha, and many benefactors of the late Laudo Lama, Soba Rinpoche's previous incarnation, had come down from Solukhumbu to hear them. They begged Rinpoche to return with them to the mountains. One of the benefactors brought a copy of a text on thought transformation as a gift for Soba Rinpoche, and a copy of a text explaining the generation and completion stage tantric practices of the Chakrasamvara Tantra for Thupten Yeshe. Lama Yeshe immediately started reading that text, said Soba Rinpoche. For many years he read it over and over. The text I was given was a big old one from Tibet, and maybe the only text I have actually ever read from beginning to end. I marked particular places with stamps from letters Zina received from all over the world. Slowly it became filled with them. Introducing Max Matthews. Far from this ancient life of ordered study and esoteric wisdom, yet just around the corner, lay the very worldly pleasures of Kathmandu. On the last Thursday of November, Zina set off with Clive Giboir for an all-American Thanksgiving Day party at an art gallery right next to the American Embassy. Max's gallery was the first commercial art gallery in Nepal. Its owner, Max Matthews, an African-American woman, worked as a teacher in the American Diplomatic Services International Schools Division. The job at Kathmandu's Lincoln School paid very well, and Max definitely had a taste for the high life. No hippie, she lived in a beautifully furnished apartment above the gallery. She had arrived in Nepal only 4 months earlier, following a posting in Russia, where she had acquired the impressive collection of icons and fine modern paintings now hanging in her new gallery. Max was dynamite, and Zina was nervous about meeting her again. They had originally known each other on Mykonos, where Max had spent her summer vacations, first while she was teaching in Germany, and then when she moved to a new teaching position in Athens. Zina had been gorgeous beyond belief, said Max, astoundingly, traffic-stoppingly beautiful, with platinum hair. She wore things like a full-length mink coat with nothing underneath. She also wore a lot of black because she'd gotten involved with this witchy coven stuff in Paris. Max was pretty gorgeous herself, a small woman with a wonderful figure, twinkling black eyes, and a vivaciousness that stood out in any crowd. Max draped herself in luxurious brocades and exotic jewels. She was more conservative than Zina, but no less noticeable. Despite some difficult history between them, they enjoyed meeting again in Kathmandu. "Well, hi, would you look at you," they said to each other, and settled into a pleasant evening of eating, drinking, and talking. It was all extremely friendly. Max found Zina still elegant, despite her dramatically changed appearance. She had gotten huge, massive. I was kind of shocked to see her in nun's robes. When I launched into a description of my latest disastrous love affair with yet another married man, Zina said to me, "Come and meet my lamas. They'll give you some advice." "I promised to get in touch," said Max. Max did go out to the Double Dorje house. There she found Zina surrounded by her usual entourage of artists and friends on the fringes of the drug scene. Their idea of meditation was erratic, eccentric, something they had worked out for themselves, without legitimate instruction. Zina took Max along to Samten Ling to meet my lamas, which is how she always referred to them. They were sitting on the floor in a very bleak little room. Lama Yeshe folded his hands, bowed and smiled, said Max. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor, sobbing. I just cried and cried. I cried for hours. Zina and Lama Zopa were both there, and I didn't even acknowledge them. It was just bang, instantaneous. When I finally stopped crying, I felt incredibly relieved, with no problems, no pain or questions. I felt I had come home and that Lama Yeshe was my guru. He just opened me up completely. I felt balanced and whole, like I was walking on air. I also felt committed. There was no going back. Not long after this, Max sponsored a 3-month Vajrayogini retreat for 20 monks at Samten Ling. Soon she was covering the Lama's food and other expenses, which was fortunate, as Zena's funds had begun to run very low. Although Max and Zena were both grand dames, they were, nevertheless, two very different people. Zena was not much older than Max, but seemed considerably older in appearance. She'd done so much, taken so many drugs, read so much esoteric literature, dabbled in her witching, and had this Blavatsky trip going on, said Max. Zena had left no stone unturned. She had made her soup, as Lamayeshi put it, and her last pregnancy seemed to have taken a lot out of her. But she was still hooked on the celebrity lifestyle with these hippies out at the Double Dorje house. On Mykonos, she had tried to get me to take acid, and was forever saying how drugs could open your mind. But I wasn't into drugs. I used to throw people out of the gallery just for smoking beedies. I couldn't tell the difference between those little rolled tobacco leaves and hashish. Sex and a few beers was my high. Zena was a much more experienced woman than I was. I was a baby. My freedom and my great salary were enough for me. Their backgrounds could not have been more different. Max's current lifestyle was a far cry from the grinding poverty of her early years. Born in 1933 to a desperately poor black undertaking in Virginia, Max and her siblings had often helped embalm bodies after school. Embalming was all the go with poor blacks, she said. Her parents' marriage broke up when she was around 10 years old, and she was adopted into a wealthy white family with a house on the West Coast and an apartment in New York. Max was 13 when that white couple separated. She stayed with her adoptive father, moving right into his bedroom. The arrangement suited me just fine. I was no victim. By the age of 10, I was already a very sexually experienced little girl, and he treated me like a princess, she said. Max eventually got a master's degree in education from Columbia University in New York, and after graduating, she was ready for adventure. Joining the American Diplomatic Service as a teacher gave her the freedom to travel, the security of an American protection, and an American salary. Her teaching career took her to Greece, Germany, and Moscow. In August 1968, it landed her in Kathmandu. Eventually, Max moved out of her apartment above the gallery to a penthouse apartment in Asansol, the busiest market square in Kathmandu, full of barefoot porters bent double under enormous loads carried on their backs, anchored with a thick strap across the forehead. Impossibly laden bicycles and handcarts swerved on their way, the air filled with noise of impatient bicycle bells and the shrill cries of street vendors. Most expatriates lived in rambling bungalows out of town, their every need catered to by hosts of servants. But to Max, Asansol was New York. She created her own roof garden, spread out the flocati rugs she brought back from her annual summer holidays in Greece, and filled the 2 floors of her spacious apartment with Russian and Tibetan antiques. On weekdays, Max taught 4th grade at Lincoln School. She was a dedicated, clever, and energetic teacher, observed Judy Weitzner, who taught 3rd graders in the adjoining classroom. Judy's husband, Chip, also taught at Lincoln School. Judy and Max became friends, and Judy started hanging out with Max in Asansol. Judy Weitzner says, "There was nothing in town quite like that apartment. Max used silver Tibetan offering bowls as wine cups, and I wanted some too. She had a whole retinue of people coming to sell her things for the house or for the gallery. It was often kind of sad seeing the Tibetans selling off their treasures, but many of them were really real dealers. They pulled all kinds of things out of the big open front of their chubas, household goods, statues, little dogs. Max was continually in financial trouble, despite her excellent salary. She lived incredibly high and never let money come between her and anything that she wanted. I was fascinated by all of it. Max never bragged about herself, but people from all over the world turned up at her apartment. She had taught in several countries and learned many languages. On different occasions, I overheard her speaking Greek and Russian. She broke into other languages so easily.